Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Ffinlo Costain. Sebastian Dötterl, Professor of Soil Resources at ETH Zurich, says that the war in Ukraine is also a war for soil. I asked Sebastian why he thinks that soil was part of President Putin's calculations.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure how it came in from the beginning, right? If this was always an ideologically motivated war, or if they played some strategic thinking about resources of the region, that if that factored in. But I do think it factors in for the prolongment of the war and what is actually at stake for both sides. That and soil is an aspect that is, in my opinion, not really evaluated properly in this context, because it's displayed in a way that Ukraine has worthwhile soils and they're important for food exports, but where these soil fertility or this worth of the soil comes from is not clear to people, and in the news at least, and so these factors might need some more light to be shed on.
If soil has become part of Putin's calculations, why now? What's changed to make soil more important?
Well, the way I would look at this is it is an extremely costly war, right? I mean, for both sides, in terms of life, infrastructure, but also for Russia in terms of reputation. Right. I mean, the latest atrocities that we heard with the bombing of the child hospital and these type of things play a big price. Now, if I look into the region's geopolitical value, I'm not looking only at ports and the ideological aspects of the ethnicity of the Russian-speaking population, but there is value to the ground itself, namely that Ukraine's food exports that are relevant for many regions of the world are predominantly driven by the large productivity of the southern and eastern Ukrainian soils. Similar regions of soils exist in Western Russia that are neighboring these regions. And so I think that factor might become more and more important as the war continues. That and the fact that there are a lot of mineral resources that might be of strategic value in the upcoming decades, namely unexplored lithium or also other rare earths and mineral ores that are estimated to be up to $12 trillion worth in the currently occupied regions of Ukraine.
Thinking about Russia's existing resources, fossil fuels are extremely important to Russia's economy. And of course, climate policy is aiming to all but strand fossil fuel assets. Do you think that this is factoring into Putin's calculations?
Hard to answer, right? And I'm also not a geostrategical expert in this sense. I would say, given how dependent the European food market, but also the industry is to the metal resources that can be found in Ukraine and how much of this goes into export. If I would be the Russian counterpart here, and I would see that there is a chance to get this type of resources under control, then maybe this factors in the prolongment of the war. Right. I mean, maybe this factors in to kind of like keep the balance shifted in terms of to continue the war or not. Maybe this is one of the factors. The other aspect is that currently Ukraine exports a lot of these food resources that are produced in the region to Eastern Europe, to Northern Africa, but also to China. So all of these are regions that strategic partnerships for Russia would be very profitable to strengthen and actually to weaken the partnerships of those regions with potentially Western-leaning countries, I would say.
Now, you've written about the way that Ukrainian soil is particularly special. So why is that? What's so important about Ukrainian soil?
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. This has to do with the development of these soils out of deposits that have been brought there at the end of the last ice age. So basically, deposits from glacial sediments and aeolian transported, so it's transported by the wind. And these deposits are highly localized in a sense, right? So we have them everywhere where these processes happened at the end of the last ice age, but nowhere have they been so massive as in Western Russia and in Eastern and Southern Ukraine. These deposits, combined with the climate of the region, make a very fertile soil. It has a very rich, humus-rich layer that can take a lot of fertile elements. It keeps them there. And with the right climate or the right irrigation strategies, you can make extremely fertile cropland out of these areas. What makes it special is that, most cropland gets degraded over time through agriculture. Now, if you have such a resource of substrates from which soils have formed that is fertile, these areas can take a lot more degradation before productivity really goes down. And looking forward, with climate projections making agriculture in many regions of the world more difficult, I think areas like that might become even more valuable in the future to secure food production for those countries that have large populations, but maybe not be able to feed them with domestic production. Right. And so in that sense, Russia and Ukraine are already among the largest exporters for agricultural goods. But this might even strengthen in the future as agriculture in many other regions of the world might become worse.
Now, you've said that soil equals geopolitical influence. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so if I'm right about this, what I'm assuming is behind some of these soil-driven incentives. If you consider that, as said, China or other Southern Eastern Asian nations in Africa that have a growing population, that have climate prospects given worsening of climate and worsening the conditions for agriculture in many of the regions, or also in Europe, if this is factored into this calculation, then the dependency of those regions that can produce agricultural goods in the future will rise for countries like that, right? And that means, on the other hand, if the region is controlled by only one actor instead of two, in the case of Ukraine versus Russia, that the political power coming from this resource is, of course, much larger, right? So, I think this might be an issue that is at play here among many others, but it's certainly one that I haven't heard much about in this context.
And there's no doubt that the technical transition to net zero and the impact of global warming and climate policies will have a dramatic effect on geopolitics. What do you think this conflict in Ukraine tells us about the changes to come and potentially the conflicts to come?
Yeah, from that perspective, it might even be good if this conflict is not driven by geopolitically relevant resources such as cropland, right? Because if that is the case, if that factors in, then we can expect more of this to happen in the future, right? Because cropland is likely not to expand due to climate change. If anything, it gets worse for many regions. And if then this leads to more conflict about food supply or distribution of food, this could lead to conflicts in terms of trade, right? Because prices for food get higher, or worst case, military conflicts. So I truly hope that in essence, this type of situation that will not occur, that a few major players control indirectly or directly most of the food supply of these very, very productive regions, independent, and keep those countries that cannot have this domestic food supply independency of this.
If we imagine a worsening case scenario, how do you think that the world can best mitigate against the violence and conflict arising from these geopolitical priorities and influences in the future? I mean, how can we protect and defend against the impacts of these strategic changes?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, again, I can answer this only for the food side or the soil side of things, right? I mean, European cropland can be very fertile, right? It can be very productive. We are dependent on these food imports elsewhere because we are mostly produce or have an overproduction for markets, right? And so we require more food than we actually would need if we would have a better distribution, less food waste, and these type of things. At the same time, we could make better policies for our soils to keep sustainable management in place. Again, this is a cost factor, right? The techniques to manage your soil better more sustainable, to keep it productive in the future, these techniques is not rocket science, right? It's a question of money most of the time and the industry to move in that direction. So I think those two factors, reducing food waste, maybe also dietary concerns about what people actually eat in terms of how much land this would use, right? These factors are relevant, I think, and better policy to keep the cropland that we have in other regions of the world sustainably usable and productive is a key factor here, I think.
And if, as you indicated earlier, we face the possibility of rogue states controlling important food commodities, does that indicate the need to localize supply chains again, as well as improving soil health and reducing waste?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely right. I mean, this is what we actually would need to consider here, right? I mean, the less monopolized the access to resources, the better usually for price development and with that also the access, of course, right? And in terms of soil, it's very much in our hands. How much are we willing to move the industry and move our own behavior so that more sustainable use of soil in the existing cropland is possible, and also to promote policies that would allow us to regenerate some of the lost fertility and productivity in soil, which is possible, but takes time.
That was Professor Sebastian Dötterl from ETH Zurich. More news as ever on our website 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.